Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the shadowy corridors of ancient Nineveh, where the scent of incense mingles with the iron tang of fear, and justice isn't just served, it's sculpted, sung, and sometimes screamed. You're standing in the heart of King Ashurbanipal's empire, the last great ruler of Assyria, whose reign was as brilliant as it was brutal. The moon hangs low over the ziggurats, casting long, eerie shadows across the stone streets, and you're about to discover that punishment here wasn't just about pain, it was performance art. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least you'll be historically accurate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the palace gates, past towering Lamassu statues with lion bodies and human heads, their eyes seeming to follow your every move. The guards don't speak, they just gesture, and you know better than to ask questions. You're here to witness justice, Assyrian style, and it begins not in a courtroom but in a courtyard paved with blood-washed limestone. The crowd gathers, not with anger but with anticipation, like they're waiting for a play to begin. Ashurbanipal believed punishment should be memorable, and tonight's performance stars a merchant accused of selling watered-down wine to the royal kitchens. His sentence? Public flogging with reeds dipped in ink, so each lash leaves a mark that reads liar in cuneiform. You wince as the first strike lands, not just for the pain but for the artistry, each welt a word, each scream a syllable. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic literacy enforcement or just poetic cruelty. Either way, the merchant now wears his crime like a scroll. You're ushered forward, past a scribe who's furiously documenting the event on a clay tablet, his stylus moving faster than your heartbeat. The tablet will be stored in the royal library, alongside epic poems and astronomical charts, because here, punishment is part of the archive. You glance up at the towering walls of the library, where thousands of tablets whisper secrets from centuries past. Ashurbanipal wasn't just a warrior, he was a scholar, obsessed with knowledge and control. And in his mind, punishment was a form of education. You're led to a chamber where the air is thick with sandalwood smoke and the silence is louder than any scream. A priest approaches, holding a bowl of water and a feather. You're told to confess a lie you've told recently. You hesitate, then mumble something about pretending to like your neighbor's cooking. The priest dips the feather and flicks water onto your forehead. That's it. No pain, no spectacle. But then he whispers, your punishment will come when you least expect it. You shiver, not from cold but from the creeping dread that Ashurbanipal's justice isn't always immediate, it's patient. You wander deeper into the palace, past murals depicting lion hunts and celestial omens. One shows the king seated on a throne made of skulls, not literal, probably, but you wouldn't bet your sandals on it. Another shows a man being dangled upside down over a pit of fire ants. You ask a passing servant if that was real. He shrugs and says, depends on the crime. You reach a garden where punishment takes a softer form. A woman accused of vanity is forced to wear a headdress made of wilted flowers and walk in circles reciting verses about humility. It's oddly beautiful, until you realize she's been walking for 3 days. Her voice is hoarse, her feet blistered, but she keeps going because stopping means starting over. You sit on a stone bench, trying to absorb it all. The punishments aren't just physical, they're psychological, theatrical, even philosophical. Ashurbanipal ruled with flair, and his justice system reflected that. You remember the merchant's ink lashes, the priest's feather, the flower-crowned woman, and you wonder what your punishment would be. Maybe being forced to listen to your own voice on a recording? Or reliving every awkward moment from middle school? Whatever it is, you know one thing, in Nineveh, justice isn't blind, it's beautifully cruel. And tonight, you're just getting started. You shuffle away from the courtyard, the echoes of the merchant's ink-stained cries still clinging to your ears like stubborn cobwebs, and find yourself drawn toward the towering structure that dominates the city's skyline, the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. It's not just a building, it's a monument to obsession. The king didn't merely collect knowledge, he hoarded it, catalogued it, and sometimes weaponized it. You step inside, and the air shifts. It's cooler here, thick with dust and reverence, and the scent of ancient parchment mingles with the faint aroma of cedarwood. Shelves stretch endlessly, stacked with clay tablets etched in cuneiform, each one a whisper from the past. You run your fingers along the edge of a tablet and feel the grooves of a story about a man who insulted the king's astrologer and was sentenced to wear a blindfold for a year so he'd never again see the stars he mocked. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical or literal, but the tablet's tone is disturbingly specific. You pass a scribe hunched over a fresh slab of clay, his stylus twitching like a nervous insect. He's recording a punishment handed down just hours ago, a baker who used spoiled dates in royal pastries. His sentence? To eat his own failed creations while reciting the king's genealogy. You peek at the tablet and see the words Ashurbanipal, son of Esarhaddon, grandson of Sennacherib, repeated like a culinary curse. The scribe glances up and mutters, he's on his fifth tart. You keep moving, deeper into the archive, where the tablets grow stranger. One records a punishment involving a man forced to wear sandals made of wax during the summer. Another describes a woman who claimed to be a prophet and was sentenced to listen to her own predictions played back on loop by temple musicians. You pause at a tablet that's cracked down the middle, its inscription barely legible. It tells of a punishment so peculiar that even modern scholars hesitate to translate it. Something about a man who impersonated a royal guard and was made to stand still for 7 days while pigeons nested on his shoulders. You squint, trying to decipher the faded symbols, and wonder if this was real or just bureaucratic satire. Either way, it's here, preserved like a fossil of fear. You reach a chamber labeled Judicial Records, and the vibe shifts again. These tablets aren't poetic, they're procedural. You read one that outlines the steps for punishing a tax evader: first, public shaming; second, forced labor in the royal gardens; third, a ceremonial dunking in the Tigris River. You imagine the splash, the gasps, the soggy dignity. Another tablet details the punishment for a soldier who fell asleep on duty. He was made to wear a helmet filled with sand for a week. The weight, the itch, the symbolism, it's all so Ashurbanipal. You sit on a stone bench and let it wash over you. The library isn't just a place of learning, it's a museum of misery, curated with care. You remember that blindfolded stargazer, the wax-sandaled baker, the pigeon perch impersonator, and you realize that in this empire, punishment was a form of storytelling. Each sentence was a narrative, a lesson, a warning. You glance at a tablet that's been placed on a pedestal, clearly important. It's the king's own decree, written in his hand, or at least, dictated by him. It reads, "Let justice be remembered as vividly as triumph." You exhale, slowly, and feel the weight of those words settle into your bones. You're not just witnessing history, you're absorbing it, one punishment at a time. And somewhere in the shadows of this library, a scribe is already preparing a tablet with your name on it. You're led out of the library by a silent attendant whose robes swish like whispers against the stone floor, and before you can ask where you're going, you're standing in a narrow alley lined with spectators. The air is thick with anticipation and the faint scent of roasted barley. A wooden platform rises ahead, and on it stands a man with trembling knees and a mouth that won't stop moving. He's a scribe, accused of spreading royal gossip, specifically, that Ashurbanipal dyes his beard with crushed beetles. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. In Nineveh, gossip is treason with flair. The punishment? Tongue removal. But not the kind you're imagining. This isn't some back alley brutality, it's a public ritual, complete with music, incense, and a crowd that treats it like a festival. You're handed a fig and told to throw it when the scribe screams. You decline. The fig is too soft, and your stomach too queasy. A priest steps forward, holding a golden tongue-like instrument shaped like a lion's paw. He chants something in Akkadian, and the crowd joins in, their voices rising like a wave of judgment. The scribe is strapped to a chair carved with images of silent mouths. His eyes dart wildly, and he tries to speak, but the priest hushes him with a gentle touch. Then, with a flourish that would impress any stage magician, the priest performs the removal not by cutting, but by applying a paste made from fig sap and powdered obsidian that numbs the tongue and causes it to swell until speech becomes impossible. It's temporary, but humiliating. The scribe will be mute for a month, forced to communicate only through clay tablets. Historians still argue whether this method was symbolic or medicinal, but the result is the same: silence. You watch as the scribe is led away, his mouth agape, his eyes filled with the kind of regret that only comes from underestimating royal vanity. The crowd disperses, chatting about the next punishment like it's a theater schedule. You overhear someone mention the pit of shame and decide to follow. But before you leave, you notice a small boy mimicking the priest's chant, his voice high and clear. You ask him what it means. He shrugs and says, "It means speak wisely, or not at all." You nod, impressed. Even the children here understand the stakes. You walk past a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated on a throne, his beard indeed suspiciously dark, and wonder if the beetle rumor was true. Probably. But you're not about to test it. You reach a plaza where a group of scribes are practicing silent communication, using hand gestures and stylus taps. One of them drops his tablet, and the others gasp. It's like watching a mime troupe with anxiety. You sit on a bench and reflect. The punishment wasn't just about silencing gossip, it was about elevating the written word. In a kingdom obsessed with documentation, forcing someone to write instead of speak is both poetic and practical. You remember the fig sap, the lion's paw tongs, the chant, and the mural, and realize that every detail is curated for maximum impact. Ashurbanipal didn't just punish, he choreographed. You stand, stretch, and prepare to follow the whispers toward the next spectacle. But as you turn the corner, you hear a faint sound behind you, a scribbled tablet dropped in haste. You glance back and see the scribe, now mute, trying to warn someone about something. You can't read the tablet from here, but the urgency in his eyes is unmistakable. You walk faster. In Nineveh, silence isn't safety, it's suspense. You follow the murmurs through winding alleys until the crowd thickens again, this time around a sunken pit carved into the earth like a forgotten well. The edges are lined with polished obsidian stones that shimmer ominously in the morning light, and a wooden ladder descends into the gloom. This is the pit of shame, and you're not just here to observe, you're invited to descend. A guard hands you a small clay token etched with the word witness, and you clutch it like a lifeline. The ladder creaks beneath your weight, and the air grows damp and sour, like old onions and regret. At the bottom, the pit opens into a circular chamber where the walls are covered in reflective bronze panels. You see yourself from every angle, sweaty, nervous, and slightly hunched. You're not alone. A man sits in the center, surrounded by baskets of rotten fruit and scrolls of insults written by schoolchildren. His crime? Public arrogance. He claimed to be wiser than the king's astrologers, and now he's sentenced to endure humiliation until he repents. The punishment is psychological, not physical. Every hour, a child descends and reads an insult aloud. Some are clever, some are cruel, and some are just confusing. One boy shouts, "Your beard looks like a broom that lost its job." The man flinches, not from pain but from the sting of being mocked by a 10-year-old. You sit quietly, watching as the man tries to maintain dignity. He's allowed no food, only sour goat's milk, and the occasional fig thrown by a spectator. You remember the fig from earlier and feel a strange sense of continuity. Historians still argue whether the pit of shame was a real judicial chamber or a metaphorical construct used in royal literature. But here, it's undeniably real. The bronze panels reflect not just faces but failures. You glance at one and see your own expression, half pity, half curiosity. A priest enters and begins a chant that echoes through the chamber. It's a litany of virtues: humility, patience, silence. The man in the center begins to cry, softly, and the priest nods. That's progress. You're told that once a prisoner weeps sincerely, they're allowed to climb out. But only after reciting a poem about their flaws. You wonder what yours would say. Maybe something about procrastination and an unhealthy attachment to historical trivia. You climb back up the ladder, your clay token now warm from your grip, and hand it to a guard who nods solemnly. You've witnessed shame, and that's enough for today. Outside the pit, vendors sell miniature bronze mirrors as souvenirs. You buy one, because of course you do. It's shaped like a tear and engraved with the phrase "Know thy reflection." You tuck it into your robe and move on. The crowd is already shifting toward the next event, and you follow, still haunted by the man's quiet sobs and the child's broom insult. You pass a mural showing Ashurbanipal gazing into a mirror, surrounded by advisors who all look slightly uncomfortable. You wonder if he ever visited the pit himself. Probably not. Kings don't do shame, they outsource it. You reach a plaza where musicians play slow, mournful tunes on lyres and flutes. It's a transition space, meant to cleanse the emotional palate before the next punishment. You sit on a stone bench and let the music wash over you. The notes are soft, deliberate, and oddly comforting. You close your eyes and see the bronze panels again, the sour milk, the fig, the poem waiting to be written. You open your eyes and stand. The next punishment awaits, and you're not done learning. Not yet. You drift with the crowd toward a quieter part of the city, where the buildings grow older and the stones beneath your feet feel warm from centuries of sun and secrets. The scent of smoke hangs in the air, not the comforting kind from a hearth, but something sharper, more ceremonial. You round a corner and find yourself in a courtyard surrounded by black basalt statues, each one depicting a figure mid-scream. This is the place where ashes speak louder than words. A priest stands beside a large bronze basin filled with glowing embers, and beside him kneels a man wrapped in linen, trembling like a leaf in a sandstorm. His crime? Treason. Not the sword-wielding kind, but the whisper in the wrong ear kind. He questioned the king's military decisions during a feast, and someone tattled. Now, he's about to be cremated, not killed, just symbolically reduced. You're told that Ashurbanipal believed in theatrical justice, and this punishment is a performance. The man's clothes will be burned while he watches, and the ashes mixed with clay to form a tablet inscribed with his confession. You sit on a stone bench, the heat from the basin licking at your ankles, and watch as the priest begins the ritual. The linen is soaked in oil and ignites with a hiss, sending up a plume of smoke that smells like regret and roasted sesame. The man sobs, not from pain but from the weight of being erased. His name will remain, but his dignity will be dust. Historians still argue whether this ritual was meant to purify or punish, but the effect is the same: transformation through fire. You glance at the tablet being prepared nearby, its surface still soft, waiting to absorb the ashes. A scribe dips his stylus and begins to write. He spoke out of turn, and now he is turned to ash. You wince at the wordplay, but it's typical of Nineveh's justice, poetic and piercing. The crowd watches in silence, some with reverence, others with popcorn made from roasted barley. You're handed a small pouch of the same and chew slowly, the crunch oddly grounding. The priest finishes the ritual and sprinkles the remaining ashes into the basin, then bows to the crowd. The man is led away, barefoot and broken, his punishment complete but his shame just beginning. You follow the scribe to the royal archive, where the tablet will be stored. It's placed beside others with similar inscriptions, each one a story of fire and failure. You notice one that reads, "She danced during morning and was turned to smoke." Another says, "He mocked the eclipse and was eclipsed." You wonder how many of these are metaphor and how many are memory. You exit the archive and find yourself in a garden where the scent of jasmine tries to overpower the lingering smoke. A woman sits beneath a fig tree, weaving a tapestry that depicts flames and faces. You ask her what she's making. She replies, "A warning." You nod and sit beside her, watching the threads twist and turn like fate itself. You remember the basin, the linen, the ashes, and the tablet, and feel a chill despite the heat. Ashurbanipal didn't just punish, he immortalized. You stand and stretch, the taste of roasted barley still on your tongue, and prepare to move on. The next punishment is said to involve crocodile dung, and you're not sure if you're ready. But in Nineveh, readiness is irrelevant. You go where the story leads. You follow a winding path past the palace gardens, where date palms sway lazily and the air grows thick with humidity and something far less pleasant. The scent hits you like a slap, pungent, earthy, and unmistakably wrong. You wrinkle your nose and glance around, wondering if someone forgot to clean the stables. But no, this is deliberate. You've arrived at the temple of healing, where punishment and medicine blur into one sticky, smelly ritual. A man kneels in the center of a tiled courtyard, surrounded by jars filled with pastes, powders, and unidentifiable sludges. His crime? Practicing false healing. He claimed to cure infertility with moonlight and goat breath, and when the royal concubine failed to conceive, his fate was sealed. The punishment? A full-body application of crocodile dung, mixed with crushed herbs and sacred oils. You gag a little, but the crowd seems unfazed. In fact, they're leaning in, eager to see the mixture applied. A priest approaches with a ladle and begins to smear the concoction across the man's back, chanting a hymn that sounds suspiciously like a recipe. You're told this mixture was once believed to have medicinal properties. Historians still argue whether it was used as a contraceptive or a cure for skin ailments. Either way, it's now a tool of humiliation. The man sobs as the paste is rubbed into his scalp, his arms, even between his toes. You watch, fascinated and horrified, as the priest explains that the punishment is symbolic. False healers must be healed by false methods. You glance at a nearby mural showing Ashurbanipal receiving a foot massage from a physician while a jar of crocodile dung sits ominously in the background. You wonder if the king ever used it himself. Probably not. He preferred his punishments external. The ritual continues, and the man is then wrapped in linen and left to bake in the sun for 3 hours. You sit under a fig tree, trying to ignore the smell, and nibble on a date offered by a vendor who cheerfully says, "Best seat in the city." You ask if this punishment is common. He shrugs and replies, "Only for healers and poets." Both claim to fix things they don't understand. You chuckle, then cough, because the air is now thick with fermented regret. A scribe nearby is recording the event on a clay tablet, his stylus moving slowly, probably because he's trying not to breathe too deeply. You peek at the inscription, "He healed with lies, now lies with healing." Another poetic jab. You glance at the man, now motionless and glistening, and wonder what he's thinking. Regret? Shame? Or just a desperate wish for a bath? You're told he'll be scrubbed clean with sand and goat milk, then forced to recite medical texts until he collapses. You ask if the texts are accurate. The priest smirks and says, "Mostly. But we add a few lines for flavor." You nod, because of course they do. You stand and stretch, the scent still clinging to your robe, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a scroll that screams, and you're not sure if that's metaphorical or literal. But in Nineveh, it's probably both. You walk away, the image of the dung-covered healer burned into your brain, and wonder if modern medicine ever had it this theatrical. Probably not. But it's hard to beat crocodile dung for dramatic effect. You wander through a quieter part of the palace complex, where the walls are lined with faded murals and the air hums with a strange, low vibration. It's not music, not wind, more like a whisper trapped in stone. You're told this is the Hall of Echoes, and at its center lies the Scroll of Screams. You hesitate at the entrance, because let's be honest, anything with screams in the name isn't exactly bedtime material. But curiosity wins, and you step inside. The chamber is circular, with a domed ceiling painted to resemble the night sky. In the center, on a pedestal carved from obsidian, rests a scroll bound in gold thread and sealed with wax shaped like a lion's fang. A priest stands nearby, his eyes closed, his lips moving silently. You're told the scroll contains the confessions of those punished for crimes too bizarre to categorize, things like sneezing during royal prayers or painting a goat to look like the king. Historians still argue whether the scroll was a real judicial record or a satirical collection meant to mock bureaucracy. Either way, it's treated with reverence here. The priest breaks the seal and begins to read, and that's when the screaming starts. Not from him, from the scroll. The moment the wax is cracked, a chorus of voices erupts from the chamber walls, echoing and overlapping like a haunted choir. You flinch, instinctively covering your ears, but the sound isn't painful, it's mesmerizing. Each voice tells a story, a punishment, a regret. One says, "I danced with the wrong sandal." Another cries, "I called the moon lazy." You sit on a stone bench, eyes wide, heart thudding, and listen as the priest continues. The scroll itself doesn't scream, it's the chamber, enchanted or engineered to respond to the words. You ask how it works, and the priest smiles cryptically. Ashurbanipal understood acoustics, he says. And guilt. You nod, because that tracks. The king wasn't just a ruler, he was a curator of consequences. The priest finishes reading, and the voices fade, replaced by a soft hum that feels like a lullaby for the guilty. You're invited to approach the scroll and touch it. You hesitate, then reach out. The parchment is warm, almost pulsing, and as your fingers graze the surface, you hear a faint whisper, "What would you confess?" You pull back, startled, and glance around. No one else reacts. Maybe it's just you. Or maybe the scroll knows. You're told that once a year, citizens are allowed to add their own regrets to the scroll, anonymously. The priest collects them, transcribes them, and seals them inside. You ask if the scroll ever fills up. He laughs. Regret is infinite. You sit quietly, absorbing the atmosphere. The chamber feels sacred, but also theatrical, like a stage for invisible actors. You remember the goat painter, the lazy moon insult, the sandal dancer, and wonder how many of these were real. Probably more than you'd like to believe. You exit the chamber, the hum still echoing in your ears, and find a vendor selling miniature scrolls made of papyrus and scented wax. You buy one, because of course you do, and tuck it into your robe. It smells like cinnamon and secrets. You walk on, the night growing cooler, and hear whispers about the next punishment, something involving clay and trials. You sigh, because you're starting to realize that in Nineveh, justice is never simple. It's layered, loud, and occasionally scented. You glance back at the scroll of screams and wonder what it would say about you. Probably something snarky. You smile and keep walking. You follow a winding path past the temple gardens, where the scent of myrrh and crushed pomegranate lingers in the air like a forgotten promise, and arrive at a courtyard that looks more like an art studio than a courtroom. Clay is everywhere, piled in baskets, smeared across stone tables, even splattered on the robes of the officials standing nearby. This is the site of the clay tablet trials, a judicial process so peculiar you're not sure whether to laugh or take notes. A man stands in the center, his hands trembling as he's handed a lump of fresh clay. His crime? Insulting the king's handwriting. Yes, really. He claimed Ashurbanipal's cuneiform looked like a drunk hedgehog's footprints, and now he's about to be judged by his own stylus skills. The punishment? He must mold a tablet that accurately records his confession, his apology, and a poem praising the king's penmanship. But here's the twist: he has to do it blindfolded. You watch as a priest ties a strip of linen over the man's eyes and places the clay on a pedestal. The crowd leans in, murmuring bets and snacking on roasted chickpeas. You're handed a handful and chew slowly, the crunch oddly satisfying. The man begins to shape the clay, his fingers fumbling, his stylus tapping like a nervous woodpecker. Historians still argue whether this trial was symbolic or actually used to determine guilt, but the ritual is undeniably theatrical. You glance at a mural nearby showing Ashurbanipal holding a stylus like a scepter, surrounded by scribes bowing low. One of them is depicted with clay dripping from his ears. You ask a guard if that's literal. He shrugs and says, "Depends on the crime." The blindfolded man finishes his tablet, and it's presented to a panel of judges, 3 elderly scribes with eyebrows like broom bristles and expressions carved from stone. They examine the tablet, muttering and squinting. One of them snorts. Another sighs. The third nods solemnly. The verdict? Acceptable apology, mediocre poem, questionable confession. The punishment is downgraded from public flogging to mandatory stylus training. You watch as the man is led to a corner where he'll spend the next week practicing cuneiform under the supervision of a retired librarian named Namu, who's rumored to have once corrected the king's grammar. You wander through the courtyard, marveling at the clay creations scattered around. Some are tablets, others are sculptures. One depicts a man bowing so low his nose touches the ground. You ask a nearby scribe what it represents. He replies, "A tax collector who forgot the king's birthday." You nod, because of course. You sit on a bench and watch a young girl mold a miniature ziggurat, her fingers deft and confident. She tells you she's practicing in case she's ever accused of architectural disrespect. You ask what that means. She shrugs and says, "Calling a temple ugly." You chuckle, then glance at a display of rejected tablets, ones deemed too sloppy, too sarcastic, or too poetic. One reads, "I'm sorry your beard is so majestic it blinds me." Another says, "Forgive me for thinking your throne looked like a fancy chair." You wonder if these were genuine or just passive-aggressive masterpieces. You stand and stretch, the scent of clay now embedded in your robe, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves noses, and you're not sure if that's metaphorical or anatomical. But in Nineveh, it's probably both. You glance back at the blindfolded man, now practicing his strokes with a determined scowl, and feel a strange sense of admiration. In this city, even punishment requires craftsmanship. You follow the scent of fresh mortar and the sound of ceremonial drums to a plaza where the crowd has gathered in a tight semicircle, their eyes fixed on a pedestal that holds something small, strange, and disturbingly familiar. As you get closer, you realize it's a nose. Not a sculpture, not a carving, an actual human nose, preserved in resin and mounted like a trophy. Welcome to the royal nose reassignments, a punishment reserved for thieves, liars, and anyone who dared sniff at royal authority. A man stands nearby, his face covered with a veil that does little to hide the flatness where his nose used to be. His crime? Stealing incense from the temple and selling it as king-blessed aroma. The punishment? His nose was ceremonially removed and repurposed as a temple offering. You blink, unsure whether to be horrified or impressed. The priest beside the pedestal begins a chant, invoking the gods of justice and fragrance. You're told that the nose now serves as a symbolic guardian of honesty placed at the temple entrance to sniff out deceit. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or reserved for high-profile cases, but the records are clear: noses were not safe in Nineveh. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated beneath a canopy of incense smoke, his own nose exaggerated to heroic proportions. A scribe nearby whispers, "The king believed the nose was the seat of truth." You nod slowly, because of course he did. The veiled man is led to a bench where he'll spend the next month crafting incense blends for temple rituals. It's part punishment, part rehabilitation. You ask if he's allowed to smell his own creations. The priest replies, "Only metaphorically." You sit beside a vendor selling miniature nose charms made of clay and scented with myrrh. You buy one, because obviously, and tuck it into your robe. It smells faintly of regret and sandalwood. You watch as children approach the pedestal and bow respectfully to the nose, then toss fig seeds into a nearby bowl. It's a ritual meant to feed the truth. You ask a child what happens if the bowl overflows. She shrugs and says, "Then someone's lying." You chuckle, then cough, because the incense smoke is thick and relentless. You wander toward a side chamber where rejected noses are stored. Yes, really. The walls are lined with small alcoves, each holding a preserved nose and a tablet describing its former owner. One reads, "He sniffed at justice and was sniffed out." Another says, "She smelled profit where there was none." You wonder if this is punishment or poetry. Probably both. You exit the chamber and find a quiet bench beneath a fig tree, where the air is clearer and the scent of sandalwood fades. You reflect on the veiled man, the pedestal, the nose charms, and the incense blends, and realize that in Nineveh, even the smallest body part could become a symbol. You stand and stretch, the charm warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves food, and you're told it's not as delicious as it sounds. You glance back at the pedestal one last time and whisper, "May your truth always smell sweet." Then you walk away, nose intact for now. You follow the scent of roasted lamb and honeyed dates to a grand hall where the air is thick with spices and tension. The feast of regret is about to begin, and you're not sure whether to be excited or terrified. The punishment here isn't starvation, it's indulgence. A man sits at the head of a long table, his eyes wide, his robe already stained with syrup. His crime? Mocking the royal chefs during a banquet, claiming their dishes were fit for goats, not gods. Ashurbanipal, never one to let an insult simmer, ordered a punishment that would make the man eat his words literally. You're told he must consume every dish from the royal menu, from pickled locusts to fermented fish paste, and do so while reciting praises for each bite. The catch? He can't stop until the king's food taster declares his enthusiasm genuine. You sit nearby, handed a small bowl of pomegranate seeds to nibble as a courtesy snack. The man begins with a platter of spiced lamb, his voice trembling as he says, "This meat is divine, like the breath of the gods." The crowd chuckles. Next comes a bowl of barley stew so thick it could patch a wall. He gulps it down, wheezing, and declares, "A texture worthy of royalty." You wince as he moves on to the pickled locusts, their tiny legs still twitching. He chews slowly, eyes watering, and whispers, "Crunchy wisdom." Historians still argue whether this punishment was symbolic or a genuine culinary gauntlet, but the records suggest it was used more than once. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated at a banquet, surrounded by chefs holding ladles like scepters. One corner shows a man vomiting into a golden bowl while a priest fans him with a scroll. You ask a nearby scribe if that's part of the ritual. He nods and says, "Only if the praise falters." You watch as the man reaches the fermented fish paste, his hands shaking, his voice barely audible. "A flavor that transcends time," he croaks. The food taster raises an eyebrow, then nods. The punishment is complete. The man is led away, bloated and broken, his robe now a tapestry of sauces and sorrow. You're told he'll spend the next week fasting in a temple, reflecting on the value of restraint. You wander through the hall, marveling at the dishes still steaming on the table. A vendor offers you a honey cake shaped like a lion's paw. You accept, because why not, and take a bite. It's surprisingly good, sweet, dense, and slightly spicy. You ask if it's part of the punishment menu. The vendor grins and says, only for dessert crimes. You chuckle, then glance at a display of rejected praise tablets one's deemed insufficiently poetic. One reads, this stew is okay. Another says, the bread is bread. You wonder if those were genuine or just acts of defiance. You sit on a bench and reflect on the man's ordeal: the lamb, the locusts, the fish paste, and the honey cake. In Nineveh, food isn't just sustenance, it's symbolism, satire, and sometimes suffering. You stand and stretch, the pomegranate seeds now gone, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a glowing loincloth, and you're not sure if that's fashion or sorcery. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the banquet table one last time and whisper, may your meals always be metaphorical. Then you walk away, appetite intact for now. You follow a trail of flickering lanterns to a courtyard bathed in soft blue light, where the air feels charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. At the center stands a man wearing what can only be described as the most unfortunate garment in Mesopotamian history: a glowing loincloth. Not metaphorically glowing. Actually glowing. Threads of crushed mica and enchanted beetle shells shimmer with every movement, casting eerie reflections on the surrounding walls. This is the loincloth of lies, a punishment reserved for those who deceive with flair. The man's crime? Selling fake relics to temple goers, claiming they were blessed by Ashurbanipal himself. One was a pebble. Another, a goat tooth. His punishment? To wear the cursed garment for 7 days, during which it glows brighter every time he tells a lie. You sit on a stone bench, handed a small scroll listing his offenses. It reads like a comedy routine: claimed to own the king's baby blanket, sold a fig leaf as a royal bookmark, declared his goat could interpret dreams. You glance at the loincloth, which pulses faintly as the man mutters, I'm innocent. The glow intensifies. The crowd chuckles. A priest steps forward and begins a chant that activates the garment's enchantment. You're told it was woven by temple weavers trained in both textile arts and magical curses. Historians still argue whether the loincloth was truly enchanted or simply embedded with reactive minerals, but the effect is undeniable. The man tries to sit, but the garment flares again, forcing him to stand. Every time he speaks, the glow shifts: blue for exaggeration, red for denial, green for flattery. You ask a nearby scribe what color means accidental fib. He replies, chartreuse. You nod, pretending to know what that looks like. The man is questioned by temple officials, each asking increasingly absurd questions. Did you once claim to own a talking fig? Glow. Have you ever kissed a statue and called it your cousin? Glow. Do you believe your goat is smarter than the king's astrologer? Glow. The crowd roars with laughter, and the loincloth now shines like a cursed disco ball. You're told the punishment ends only when the garment dims completely, which requires a full day of silence and truthfulness. The man is led to a quiet chamber where he'll meditate and recite royal decrees until the glow fades. You wander through the courtyard, where replicas of the loincloth are sold as novelty items. You buy a miniature version, because obviously, and tuck it into your robe. It's made of dyed linen and glitter, and smells faintly of fig and embarrassment. You pass a mural showing Ashurbanipal holding a glowing scroll, surrounded by advisors wearing shimmering sashes. One corner shows a man hiding behind a curtain, his loincloth glowing through the fabric. You ask a guard if that's based on a real event. He shrugs and says, "Probably. We're very literal here." You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the lies, the colors, the cursed couture. In Nineveh, deception isn't just exposed, it's illuminated. You stand and stretch, the miniature loincloth warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a wall that whispers, and you're not sure if it's haunted or just nosy. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the glowing man one last time and whisper, "May your wardrobe always tell the truth." Then you walk away, honesty intact for now. You follow a winding corridor that narrows with each step, the walls closing in like secrets, until you reach a chamber so quiet it makes your heartbeat sound like a drum. The whispering wall looms ahead, an ancient slab of polished basalt etched with thousands of tiny cuneiform symbols, each one a confession, a rumor, or a regret. You're told this wall doesn't just record secrets, it repeats them. Not aloud, but in whispers that only the guilty can hear. A man stands before it, trembling, his ears twitching like a rabbit sensing a storm. His crime? Eavesdropping on royal council meetings and selling the information to rival scribes. His punishment? To stand before the wall for 3 days, listening to every secret he's ever overheard, repeated back in a voice that sounds eerily like his own. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "truth echoes louder than lies," and watch as the man leans in, eyes wide, lips trembling. The wall begins to hum, a low vibration that seems to crawl into your bones. Then the whispers start. "He said the king's sandals squeak." "She claimed the queen sleeps with her eyes open." "They plotted to replace the royal astrologer with a goat." You blink. "That goat again." The man gasps, clutching his ears, but the whispers continue, relentless and oddly rhythmic. Historians still argue whether the wall was enchanted or simply acoustically engineered to reflect sound in strange ways, but the psychological effect is undeniable. You ask a nearby priest how the wall knows what to say. He smiles and replies, "It listens. Always." You nod slowly, because of course it does. The man tries to step back, but the guards gently push him forward. He must endure the full cycle, which includes not just his own secrets but those he enabled. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated before the wall, his advisors whispering into jars. One corner shows a man running from the chamber, his ears bleeding. You ask a scribe if that's literal. He shrugs and says, "Depends on the guilt." You wander through the chamber, where smaller whispering stones are displayed, each one a fragment of the wall, used for personal reflection. You're handed one and told to hold it close. You do, and hear a faint voice say, "You forgot your cousin's birthday." You flinch. It's true. You tuck the stone into your robe, now officially haunted. You pass a vendor selling earplugs made of beeswax and fig resin. You buy a pair, because obviously, and slip them in. The whispers fade, but the memory lingers. You sit beneath a torchlit alcove and reflect on the punishment, the secrets, the echoes, the eerie intimacy. In Nineveh, guilt isn't just exposed, it's amplified. You stand and stretch, the whispering stone warm against your side, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves tattoos in ancient script, and you're not sure if it's branding or biography. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the wall one last time and whisper, "May your secrets stay silent." Then you walk away, ears intact for now. You follow a path lit by flickering oil lamps to a courtyard where the scent of ink and burnt sandalwood hangs heavy in the air. The Ink of Infamy ceremony is about to begin, and you're told it's one of the most permanent punishments in Ashurbanipal's repertoire. A man stands in the center, shirtless, his skin pale and trembling. His crime? forging royal documents and selling fake decrees to merchants. One scroll claimed that fig prices were to be tripled by divine order. Another declared a national holiday in honor of goats. You're handed a small clay tablet listing his offenses, and it reads like a bureaucratic fever dream. The punishment? Tattooing his crimes onto his body in ancient Sumerian script, using ink made from crushed obsidian, myrrh, and the ashes of burned scrolls. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "let the skin speak what the mouth denied," and watch as a priest approaches with a stylus-like needle. The crowd leans in, murmuring bets on how many lines of text will fit on the man's back. You're told the ink is sacred, reserved for royal decrees and irreversible truths. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were meant to shame or to archive, but the craftsmanship is undeniable. The priest begins, chanting softly as he inscribes the first line, "He forged the king's voice." The man winces, but doesn't scream. The second line, "He sold lies as law." The third, "He honored goats above gods." You blink. That goat again. You ask a nearby scribe if goats were particularly controversial. He shrugs and says, "Only when they get political." You nod, pretending that makes sense. The tattooing continues, each line etched with precision, each word a permanent reminder. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal inspecting a line of tattooed criminals, his stylus raised like a branding iron. One corner shows a man with script curling around his neck like a serpent. You ask a guard if that's real. He replies, "He forged a royal love letter." Very poetic. You wander through the courtyard, where replicas of the tattoos are displayed on clay mannequins. One reads, "I claimed the moon owed me money." Another says, "I declared myself king of figs." You wonder if these were genuine or just creative confessions. You're handed a small scroll with temporary tattoos in cuneiform. You pick one that says "mostly innocent" and press it to your wrist. It tingles slightly, then fades. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the ink, the script, the permanence. In Nineveh, lies aren't just punished, they're published. You stand and stretch, the scroll tucked into your robe, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves rats and a maze, and you're not sure if it's psychological or just really bad pest control. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the tattooed man one last time and whisper, "May your truths be less itchy." Then you walk away, skin unmarked for now. You follow a winding path past the temple gardens, where the fig trees sway like gossiping elders, and arrive at a stone archway carved with tiny rat silhouettes. A guard hands you a small token shaped like a cheese wedge and says, "For luck." You're not sure if he's joking, but you pocket it anyway. Welcome to the Royal Rat Maze, a punishment designed not for pain, but for psychological unraveling. A man stands at the entrance, barefoot and visibly sweating. His crime? Hoarding grain during a famine and selling it at triple the price. Ashurbanipal, ever the fan of poetic justice, sentenced him to navigate a labyrinth filled with trained rats, yes, trained to nibble at guilt. You're told the maze was designed by the king's chief architect and his royal zoologist, a duo historians still argue about. Some say they were brothers. Others say they were rivals who settled disputes with rodent races. Either way, the maze is infamous. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let guilt gnaw where justice cannot," and watch as the man steps inside. The walls are high, the corridors narrow, and the rats, dozens of them, scurry with purpose. These aren't wild pests. They've been conditioned to respond to certain scents, especially the oil rubbed on the man's feet before entry. You ask a nearby scribe what the oil is made of. He replies, "Regret and goat fat." You nod, because of course. The man moves slowly, trying to avoid the rats, but they swarm, nibbling gently, not enough to injure, just enough to irritate. He yelps, stumbles, and mutters apologies to no one in particular. The maze is designed to take 3 hours, but most finish in 5. Some never finish. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal watching from a balcony, rats forming patterns beneath him. One corner shows a man curled in a fetal position, rats sleeping on his back. You ask a priest if that's symbolic. He shrugs and says, sometimes guilt becomes comfort. You wander through a side chamber where miniature mazes are displayed, each one a replica of the real thing. You're handed one made of clay and asked to guide a tiny rat figurine through it. You fail miserably, but the vendor assures you that's normal. Only the guilty succeed, he says. You chuckle, then cough, because the scent of goat fat and fear is strong. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the maze, the rats, the slow unraveling. In Nineveh, justice isn't just swift, it's sneaky. You stand and stretch, the cheese token warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves carving confessions blindfolded, and you're not sure if it's art or agony. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the maze one last time and whisper, may your regrets never nibble. Then you walk away, feet intact for now. You follow a narrow path lined with broken tablets and half-erased inscriptions until you reach a courtyard where the air feels heavy with anticipation and powdered limestone. The ground is littered with styluses, blindfolds, and fragments of confessions carved into stone. This is the site of the curse of the cuneiform, a punishment that turns guilt into sculpture. A man stands in the center, blindfolded, holding a stylus in one hand and a slab of clay in the other. His crime? Denying his involvement in a failed irrigation project that flooded a royal garden and drowned 3 prized fig trees. Ashurbanipal, who reportedly named those trees after constellations, was not amused. The punishment? The man must carve his confession into stone backwards, blindfolded, and without guidance. You sit on a bench etched with the phrase "Let truth be felt before it's seen," and watch as the priest ties the blindfold and places the slab on a pedestal. The crowd leans in, murmuring bets on how many symbols he'll get wrong. You're handed a small clay token shaped like a fig leaf and told it's a symbol of botanical justice. You nod, because of course. The man begins to carve, his stylus tapping and dragging with hesitant rhythm. The first few symbols are shaky but recognizable. Then things get weird. One line reads, "I am not a river." Another says, "The figs forgave me." You blink. The priest frowns. The crowd chuckles. Historians still argue whether this punishment was meant to extract truth or simply confuse the guilty into submission. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal inspecting a wall of confessions, his stylus glowing, his advisors squinting. One corner shows a man carving with his feet while blindfolded. You ask a scribe if that's real. He replies, he claimed hands were dishonest. You wander through a side chamber where rejected confessions are displayed, each one a masterpiece of nonsense. One reads, "I stole the moon's shadow." Another says, "My goat made me do it." You wonder if these were genuine or just poetic resistance. You're handed a stylus and invited to try carving your own confession. You write, "I once pretended to understand cuneiform," and the priest nods solemnly. Honesty is the first step. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the blindfold, the backwards carving, the fig trees lost to ambition. In Nineveh, truth isn't just spoken, it's sculpted. You stand and stretch, the fig leaf token warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a desert storm trial, and you're not sure if it's legal or meteorological. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the blindfolded man one last time and whisper, "May your confessions always face forward." Then you walk away, stylus intact for now. You follow a trail of wind chimes made from broken styluses and fig seeds to the edge of the city, where the landscape shifts from stone to sand and the sky stretches wide and unforgiving. This is the site of the sandstorm tribunal, a punishment that blends justice with nature's fury. A man stands in the center of a ring of stones, his robe flapping wildly in the rising wind. His crime? Falsifying weather omens to delay a royal campaign. He claimed the gods warned of thunder, but the skies stayed clear, and Ashurbanipal's army missed a strategic window. The punishment? To stand trial in the middle of a desert storm, where visibility vanishes and judgment is delivered by voice alone. You sit on a bench carved from petrified wood, etched with the phrase "Let the wind reveal what the eyes cannot," and watch as the priests begin their ritual. They chant to summon the storm, and the sky obliges. Sand begins to swirl, first gently, then with force, until the man is barely visible. You're handed a small pouch of fig seeds and told to toss one if you hear a lie. You clutch it tightly, unsure what qualifies. The tribunal begins. A voice booms from the edge of the storm, asking, "Did you speak for the gods or for yourself?" The man shouts, "For the gods." The wind howls louder. You toss a seed. Others follow. The next question, "Did you profit from the delay?" He hesitates, then yells, "No." The sand stings your face. Another seed flies. Historians still argue whether the storm was natural or summoned, but the timing is suspiciously perfect. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal standing in a sandstorm, his robe untouched, his advisors shielding their eyes. One corner shows a man buried up to his neck in sand, a fig tree growing beside him. You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, he was sentenced to grow patience. You wander through a side tent where sand-blasted tablets are displayed, each one a record of storm trials. One reads, "He spoke with thunder but lacked lightning." Another says, "The wind found his truth buried." You wonder if these were genuine or just poetic verdicts. You're handed a miniature sand tablet and asked to inscribe your own storm truth. You write, "I once blamed the weather for being late," and the priest nods. The wind forgives, but remembers. You sit beneath a fig tree planted in a clay pot, its leaves trembling in the breeze, and reflect on the punishment, the storm, the seeds, the booming questions. In Nineveh, justice isn't just blind, it's blinding. You stand and stretch, the seed pouch warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a beard and bronze, and you're not sure if it's fashion or burden. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the swirling sand one last time and whisper, "May your truths never be buried." Then you walk away, eyes squinting for now. You follow a trail of bronze tiles that shimmer like trapped sunlight to a courtyard where laughter mingles with the clink of metal. The air smells of polished copper and roasted chickpeas, and the crowd is gathered around a man whose beard defies logic, gravity, and good taste. Welcome to the bronze beard blunder, a punishment reserved for those who mock royal appearance. The man's crime? Making a joke about Ashurbanipal's beard during a temple feast. He reportedly said, "It looks like a broom that married a curtain." The punishment? To wear a beard made of solid bronze, weighing nearly 50 pounds, for 10 days. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let weight remind the tongue of its reach," and watch as the man struggles to keep his head upright. The beard is attached with leather straps and ceremonial pins shaped like lion claws. Every movement is a workout. You're handed a small bronze charm shaped like a beard curl and told it's a token of respectful silence. You tuck it into your robe, already feeling the weight of secondhand shame. The priest begins a chant, invoking the gods of dignity and metallurgy. The crowd joins in, their voices rising like molten metal. Historians still argue whether the beard was symbolic or actually worn, but the records describe neck injuries and posture therapy. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated on a throne, his beard flowing like a waterfall, his advisors holding mirrors angled just right. One corner shows a man bent double under a bronze beard, children tossing figs at him. You ask a scribe if that's accurate. He replies, the figs were symbolic. The pain wasn't. You wander through a side chamber where rejected beard designs are displayed, some too heavy, some too curly, one shaped like a ziggurat. You're handed a miniature bronze beard and invited to try it on. You decline, citing emotional allergies. The vendor nods solemnly. Wise choice. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the weight, the mockery, the metallic humility. In Nineveh, words aren't just punished, they're sculpted into reminders. You stand and stretch, the beard charm warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a prophet and public irony, and you're not sure if it's divine or just dramatic. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the bronze-bearded man one last time and whisper, "May your jokes always be feather light." Then you walk away, chin high for now. You follow a winding path past the temple of Ishtar, where incense curls like secrets and the air feels thick with anticipation. The crowd is quieter here, more reverent, gathered around a raised platform draped in velvet and mystery. At its center sits the oracle's irony, a punishment that turns prophecy into public spectacle. A man kneels before a veiled prophet whose voice is said to echo with divine sarcasm. His crime? Demanding a personal prophecy during a royal ceremony, interrupting the sacred rites to ask, "Will I be rich by next spring?" Ashurbanipal, who believed prophecy was a gift not a service, ordered a punishment that would make the man's fate known to all. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase, "Let those who seek answers prepare for echoes," and watch as the prophet begins her ritual. She holds a scroll made of fig bark and speaks in riddles, each line more cryptic than the last. You will find gold in your sleep, but wake with sand. Your goat will speak, but only in dreams. The moon will nod, but not to you. The crowd murmurs, scribes furiously transcribing every word. You're handed a small token shaped like a crescent moon and told it's a symbol of unasked wisdom. You tuck it into your robe, already feeling the weight of unsolicited insight. The man tries to respond, but the prophet silences him with a gesture. His punishment is to remain silent while his fate is read aloud, line by line, to the entire city. Historians still argue whether the oracle's words were divinely inspired or just poetic justice, but the tradition endured for centuries. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated beside a prophet, his advisors holding scrolls and fig branches. One corner shows a man covering his ears while children chant his prophecy. You ask a priest if that's symbolic. He replies, the fig branches were for flavor. The chanting was real. You wander through a side chamber where past prophecies are displayed, each one carved into clay tablets shaped like ears. One reads, "She will marry a shadow." Another says, "He will eat figs and regret them." You wonder if these were genuine or just dramatic flair. You're invited to receive a mini prophecy from a junior oracle. You agree, and she whispers, "You will walk far, but forget why." You nod, because that already feels true. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the riddles, the silence, the public fate. In Nineveh, curiosity isn't just punished, it's narrated. You stand and stretch, the moon token warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves sleep deprivation and lullabies, and you're not sure if it's torture or spa day. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the prophet one last time and whisper, "May your questions always be quiet." Then you walk away, ears ringing for now. You follow a winding corridor lined with soft cushions and flickering lanterns to a chamber that smells of lavender, warm milk, and something faintly unsettling like comfort with a catch. This is the royal sleep deprivation chamber, a punishment that masquerades as luxury but leaves the mind unraveling thread by thread. A man lies on a plush bed carved from cedarwood, his eyes wide, his limbs twitching. His crime? Falling asleep during a royal recital of Ashurbanipal's poetry. The king had just finished a 300-line ode to his beard, and the man snored audibly. The punishment? Forced wakefulness for 3 days, surrounded by soothing sounds and scents designed to lull but never allow rest. You sit on a bench embroidered with the phrase "Let rest be earned, not stolen," and watch as temple attendants begin the ritual. They light incense made from crushed fig leaves and myrrh, play lullabies on lyres, and gently fan the man with scrolls of bedtime stories. He twitches, groans, and mutters nonsense. You're handed a small sachet of sleep herbs and told to hold it close. You do, and it smells like dreams you're not allowed to have. The attendants begin reciting soft poetry, each line more hypnotic than the last. The moon drips honey on your brow. The stars hum lullabies in fig-sweet tones. The wind wraps you in velvet silence. The man sobs, not from pain but from the cruelties of rest. Historians still argue whether this punishment was psychological warfare or a misunderstood spa treatment, but the records describe hallucinations, spontaneous dancing, and one man who tried to marry a pillow. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal reclining on a bed of scrolls, his advisors reading to him while a servant sprinkles fig petals. One corner shows a man with wide eyes and tangled hair, surrounded by sleeping cats. You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, the cats were real. The sleep wasn't. You wander through a side chamber where rejected lullabies are displayed, each one deemed too effective. One reads, "Close your eyes and drift like a fig leaf." Another says, "Let the stars tuck you in." You wonder if these were genuine or just poetic sabotage. You're invited to try the chamber for a moment. You lie down, and an attendant begins to hum. Your eyes flutter, your limbs relax, and then a bell rings. Time's up. You sit up, dazed, and the attendant smiles. Now imagine that for 72 hours. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the lullabies, the incense, the cruel comfort. In Nineveh, rest isn't just denied, it's performed. You stand and stretch, the sleep sachet warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a parade of falsehoods and fig-throwing children, and you're not sure if it's theater or therapy. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the sleepless man one last time and whisper, "May your dreams never be interrupted." Then you walk away, eyelids heavy for now. You follow a trail of fig skins and laughter to a wide plaza where the air buzzes with anticipation and the scent of roasted dates. The festival of falsehoods is in full swing, and you're told it's not just a punishment, it's a public celebration of deceit, irony, and very creative insults. A man stands on a decorated platform, dressed in a robe stitched with exaggerated symbols of his lies, a golden goat, a scroll with wings, and a crown made of fig branches. His crime? Claiming to be a royal advisor when he was, in fact, a fig merchant with a flair for storytelling. He convinced half the city that Ashurbanipal consulted him on beard maintenance and dream interpretation. The punishment? A parade through Nineveh as the living lie, while children throw figs and shout rehearsed insults. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let falsehoods walk where truth stands still," and watch as the procession begins. Temple musicians play a jaunty tune, and the crowd cheers not with anger, but with theatrical glee. The children line the path, each holding a fig and a scroll of approved taunts. One shouts, "Your wisdom is as deep as a puddle." Another yells, "Even goats roll their eyes at you." You blink. That goat again. The man walks slowly, his robe rustling, his crown wobbling, his dignity unraveling. Historians still argue whether this festival was a genuine judicial sentence or a civic tradition designed to reinforce honesty through humor. Either way, it's effective. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal watching a parade from his balcony, tossing figs with surprising accuracy. One corner shows a man tripping over his own lies, depicted as literal scrolls wrapped around his ankles. You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, he once claimed to invent fig jam. The scrolls were poetic justice. You wander through a side market where miniature living lie dolls are sold, each one dressed in absurd robes and tiny fig crowns. You buy one, because obviously, and tuck it into your robe. It smells faintly of roasted dates and embarrassment. You're invited to write your own falsehood on a ceremonial scroll. You scribble, I once beat Ashurbanipal in chess, and hand it to a priest, who nods solemnly and says, may your fiction be fruitful. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the parade, the children, the fig-based satire. In Nineveh, lies aren't just punished, they're paraded. You stand and stretch, the doll warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves honey and insects, and you're not sure if it's sticky or sinister. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the living lie one last time and whisper, may your truths be less theatrical. Then you walk away, fig-free for now. You follow a trail of buzzing sounds and sweet, cloying air to a sunlit courtyard where the ground glistens with syrup and the walls are covered in netting. This is the site of the honey trap execution, not a death sentence, but a punishment so sticky and humiliating it might make you wish for oblivion. A man stands in the center, stripped to the waist, his arms bound loosely with fig vine rope. His crime? Spreading false rumors about the queen's bathing habits, claiming she used goat milk and sang to her soap. Ashurbanipal, who took royal dignity very seriously, ordered a punishment that would make the man a spectacle of discomfort. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase let sweetness sting where bitterness hides, and watch as temple attendants begin the ritual. They coat the man in honey, real honey, thick and golden, poured from ceremonial jars shaped like lion heads. The crowd watches in gleeful silence as the syrup drips down his shoulders, pools at his feet, and begins to attract every insect in Nineveh. Flies, ants, and bees arrive like invited guests, buzzing with purpose. The man flinches, twitches, and tries to remain still. You're handed a small wax token shaped like a bee and told it's a symbol of truth's sting. You tuck it into your robe, already feeling itchy in sympathy. Historians still argue whether this punishment was symbolic or used for pest control, but the records describe swelling, sobbing, and one man who claimed to hear bees whispering royal secrets. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated beneath a fig tree, bees hovering around him like bodyguards. One corner shows a man covered in honey, children tossing flower petals at him. You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, the petals were for irony. The bees were very real. You wander through a side chamber where jars of ceremonial honey are displayed, each one labeled with the crime it punished. One reads, for gossip. Another says, for exaggeration. A third simply says, for being annoying. You're invited to taste a drop of truth honey, said to be infused with fig pollen and royal forgiveness. You do, and it's oddly spicy. The priest smiles and says, truth burns before it heals. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the honey, the insects, the sticky shame. In Nineveh, sweetness isn't just a treat, it's a trap. You stand and stretch, the bee token warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a man who ate scrolls and now recites them endlessly, and you're not sure if it's poetic or just indigestion. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the honey-coated man one last time and whisper, may your words never attract flies. Then you walk away, skin crawling for now. You follow a trail of torn parchment and half-chewed scroll fragments to a quiet chamber where the air smells of ink, fig paste, and something faintly papery. This is the site of the scroll eater's sentence, a punishment so bizarre it feels like satire, but in Nineveh, satire is often policy. A man sits cross-legged on a stone platform, his mouth stained with ink, his voice hoarse from endless recitation. His crime? Consuming royal decrees to prevent their enforcement. He believed that if no one could read the law, it couldn't be followed. Ashurbanipal, who considered his scrolls sacred extensions of his will, was not amused. The punishment? To recite every decree he consumed word for word, day after day, until his voice gives out or the scribes say enough. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "let the mouth restore what the stomach stole," and watch as the man begins his daily recital. By order of the king, all fig vendors must, he croaks, then coughs, then continues. You're handed a small clay token shaped like a scroll and told it's a symbol of digestive justice. You tuck it into your robe, already feeling full of second-hand regret. Historians still argue whether this punishment was literal or metaphorical, but the records describe ink poisoning, scroll fragments in teeth, and one man who claimed to taste royal authority. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal surrounded by scrolls, his advisors feeding him lines while a servant fans his stylus. One corner shows a man with a bloated belly and a speech bubble reading, "I regret everything." You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, he ate a decree about fig taxes. The irony was delicious. You wander through a side chamber where rejected scrolls are displayed, each one half-eaten, half-legible. One reads, "All goats must be registered." Another says, "No figs on Thursdays." You wonder if these were genuine or just culinary rebellion. You're invited to read a line from a ceremonial scroll. You do, and it says, "Let the tongue be the parchment of penance." The priest nods solemnly. You may keep your voice. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the ink, the recitation, the edible laws. In Nineveh, consumption isn't just physical, it's judicial. You stand and stretch, the scroll token warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves a ziggurat of regrets, and you're not sure if it's architectural or emotional. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the scroll eater one last time and whisper, "May your words never be swallowed." Then you walk away, voice intact for now. You follow a winding path of carved stone steps that rise gradually toward the sky, each one etched with a phrase that feels like a whisper from someone who's made a very bad decision. This is the punishment pyramid, a towering ziggurat built not to honor the gods, but to showcase regret layer by layer, step by step. A man stands at the base, barefoot and solemn, his robe marked with symbols of his misdeeds. His crime? Mismanaging temple funds and using sacred offerings to build a personal bathhouse shaped like a lion. Ashurbanipal, who believed in divine accounting, ordered a punishment that would make the man climb toward clarity. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let each step reveal what silence hides," and watch as the man begins his ascent. With each step, he must read aloud a carved confession, some his own, some borrowed from past climbers. I mistook greed for need. I bathed in blessings meant for others. I called my goat a priest. You blink. That goat again. The man pauses, breathes, and continues. The climb is steep, the air thin, and the confessions increasingly poetic. Historians still argue whether the ziggurat was used solely for punishment or also for spiritual cleansing, but the inscriptions suggest both. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated at the summit, his advisors holding scrolls and fig branches. One corner shows a man reaching the top, only to be handed a broom. You ask a scribe if that's symbolic. He replies, he was told to sweep away his pride. You wander through a side chamber where miniature ziggurats are displayed, each one carved with tiny regrets. One reads, "I borrowed a scroll and never returned it." Another says, "I told a fig it was ugly." You wonder if these were genuine or just ceremonial exaggerations. You're invited to climb a small replica and read a line aloud. You do, and it says, "I once pretended to understand astrology." The priest nods. The stars forgive, but they remember. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the climb, the confessions, the architectural humility. In Nineveh, regret isn't just felt, it's ascended. You stand and stretch, the miniature ziggurat warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment involves interpreting the king's dreams, and you're not sure if it's mystical or just really risky. But in this city, it's probably both. You glance back at the climbing man one last time and whisper, "May your regrets always lead upward." Then you walk away, step steady for now. You follow a winding corridor lined with velvet drapes and carved moon symbols to a chamber that feels like a dream you're not sure you want to have. The air is thick with incense and fig-scented oil, and the walls shimmer with painted constellations. This is the chamber of the king's dream interpreter, a punishment reserved for those who dared to decode Ashurbanipal's nightly visions and got it wrong. A man kneels before a scroll, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. His crime? Misinterpreting a royal dream involving a lion, a fig tree, and a goat wearing sandals. He claimed it meant peace. The next day, a rebellion broke out. Ashurbanipal, who believed dreams were divine blueprints, ordered a punishment that would make the man live in a waking nightmare. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let sleep speak only when truth listens," and watch as the priest begins the ritual. The man is handed a fresh scroll and told to interpret the king's latest dream: a river turns to ink, a goat sings, and the moon hides behind a fig. You blink. That goat again. The man stammers, "It means the kingdom will be blessed with poetry?" The priest frowns. The crowd murmurs. The punishment begins. The man is led to a stage where actors reenact his incorrect interpretation badly. One wears a goat mask and sings off-key. Another pretends to be the moon, hiding behind a fig tree made of linen. The audience laughs, not cruelly, but with theatrical delight. Historians still argue whether this punishment was satire or serious ritual, but the records describe public performances, scroll rewrites, and one man who tried to sue a dream. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal asleep on a throne, his advisors whispering interpretations while a scribe sketches goats. One corner shows a man being chased by a fig with legs. You ask a priest if that's symbolic. He replies, "He said figs were omens." The king disagreed. You wander through a side chamber where rejected dream interpretations are displayed, each one carved into clay pillows. One reads, "The stars are jealous of my beard." Another says, "The goat wants a promotion." You wonder if these were genuine or just creative panic. You're invited to interpret a ceremonial dream. You read, "A fig floats down the Tigris, singing lullabies." You say, "It means someone's overdue for rest." The priest nods. Wise and safe. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the dreams, the reenactments, the symbolic chaos. In Nineveh, sleep isn't just sacred, it's scrutinized. You stand and stretch, the clay pillow warm in your pocket, and prepare to move on. The next punishment is the final one, a descent into silence and myth. You glance back at the dream interpreter one last time and whisper, "May your sleep always be literal." Then you walk away, eyes open for now. You follow a winding path that dips gently downward, the stones beneath your feet growing smoother, cooler, and quieter with each step. The air shifts, less scented, less crowded, more still. You've arrived at the final whisper of Nineveh, the last punishment in Ashurbanipal's repertoire, and it feels less like a sentence and more like a surrender. A man stands at the entrance to a cavern carved into the earth, his robe plain, his eyes closed. His crime? None that anyone remembers. He was accused of something vague, disturbing the silence of the archives, and sentenced to a punishment that fades into myth. You sit on a bench carved with the phrase "Let silence be the final witness," and watch as the man steps into the cavern. No guards follow. No crowd cheers. He walks alone, into a space where sound is forbidden and memory is optional. You're told he will remain there for 7 days, surrounded by whispering walls that repeat fragments of forgotten punishments. Not full stories, just echoes. The fig was not yours. The goat knew better. The ink remembers. You blink. That goat again. The cavern is lined with tablets too worn to read, scrolls too faded to unroll, and murals so faint they resemble dreams. Historians still argue whether this punishment was real or metaphorical, but the chamber exists, and the silence is undeniable. You glance at a mural showing Ashurbanipal seated in a quiet room, his advisors asleep, his stylus still. One corner shows a man dissolving into mist. You ask a priest if that's symbolic. He replies, he became part of the archive. You wander through a side chamber where fragments of forgotten punishments are displayed, each one incomplete. A broken stylus. A half-burned scroll. A fig seed turned to stone. You're invited to leave a whisper of your own. You write, "I once forgot the ending," and place it on a shelf labeled "Almost." The priest nods. That's enough. You sit beneath a fig tree and reflect on the punishment, the silence, the fading, the myth. In Nineveh, justice doesn't just end, it dissolves. You stand and stretch, the stone fig seed warm in your pocket, and prepare to leave. The cavern behind you hums softly, like a lullaby for history. You glance back one last time and whisper, "May your endings always be gentle." Then you walk away, story complete for now. And now, as the last echoes of Nineveh fade into the hush of night, you feel the weight of ancient justice settle into something softer, like dust on a forgotten scroll. The punishments you've witnessed weren't just acts of cruelty or control, they were performances, rituals, and strange little poems carved into the bones of an empire. You've walked through ink and honey, climbed regret, listened to walls that whisper, and watched fig-throwing children laugh at lies. You've seen goats in dreams, bronze beards in shame, and scrolls eaten like secrets. And through it all, you've felt the pulse of Ashurbanipal's rule, not just as a king, but as a curator of consequence.